some of the research in here that people would rather shock themselves.
Oh, that's right. That was a killer study. Like, yeah.
It wouldn't be uncommon for you or your friends to say, if I just had a little more time, and then we start to muse and fantasize what we would do. We would, put our feet up, we would, whatever. We would just have a little bit more time to ourselves. Well, there was an experiment that was run that gave people open time, and they would rather shock themselves than sit with their thoughts. They'd rather shock themselves than meditate. They'd rather shock themselves than muse with their imagination. And so we really don't want to be with ourselves. So when given time, we find ways to fill it. And when people say, oh, how you doing? You busy? It's this reflexive thought that if you can cram a bunch of activity into your time, then you must be successful. You must be in demand. When actually the core of that is that we don't want to be by ourselves with ourselves, because it's sometimes haunting, and it's sometimes the truth of how we feel about ourselves is, I don't know, like you got to face down some dragons if you really want to be free, emotionally, and certainly from a human standpoint. So.
Yeah. And do you think one of the things that gets in the way is, the fear of what other people think of you?
Yeah. So what happened was I wrote an article. I had this thing that was happening for me, which I noticed that I was playing a second game. And it happened, I first noticed it when I was 16 years old. And I saved up a couple summers, bought myself a Mazda B2000 pickup truck, that's all I could afford.
Yeah.
And I was driving down the street, and there was a car passing me in the same direction. So they're going just a little bit faster than me. And I remember I thought to myself, like, oh, sit up, look cool, because you want to look cool. And so I didn't realize, how incredibly unproductive that was going to be for the next handful of years for me. And the first 16 years, I'm sure I was mired by it. But I put my hand on the steering wheel, and I had like a cool kid lean, and I glanced over at the car that was barely passing me, and they weren't paying any attention to me. They had no interest in what was happening inside my car. And I had a lightning bolt moment, like, what am I doing? Like, why am I trying to fake or look or prop up to somebody that had no interest, zero interest? Like, what was I doing in my regular relationships, let alone this relationship with someone that I was conforming or contorting or being something that I thought that they would approve of? And I was embarrassed by it. I thought that's kind of crazy that I'm acting this way.
That's some high-level insight for a 16-year-old
kid, yeah.
It's just, so yeah, you're done.
No, like, you've got kids, Yeah,
like, well, and it's making me think of my 16-year-old.
Yeah.
And they're hyper aware of their surroundings, in my opinion.
And so I kept it to myself, and I was like, I knew it was not the way to go and the way to be, but I also knew that I had this other need to want to be accepted, to look favorable in the eyes of others. But I didn't want to talk about that, because that's certainly for the weak one. That's certainly for the one that is kind of a phony or something. And then I started hearing it in conversations with elite athletes when I was spending time with them. And they wouldn't say it exactly like I just said it. They'd say, when I say, like, what's your relationship with fear? And they go, oh yeah, it's there. I say, well, what are you afraid of? And they'd say, and I'm shorthanding, thousands of conversations. They say something like, failure, not living up to my potential. And then double click on that and say, well, what does that mean? Make sure we're not talking about fear of injury. It's something else.
Yeah.
And they go, yeah, it's not. It's really not injury. I say, well, what is it? And they say, well, it's like letting people down. It's really like looking stupid and like kind of blowing it when I have my moment, or if I have my moment. That's fear of another person's opinion of who you are. And so I wrote an article on HBR, Harvard Business Press, and they called 24 months after I released it, and they said, who are you? And I said, thank you. And they said, look, this does not happen for 24 months in a row. Your article on how to stop worrying about what people think you, that was the title of it. It was the #1 downloaded article for 24 months in a row. And so they said, let's write a book. And so I said, I got to go to work and put some science behind, those original ideas. And And then so it took another 2 years, and so here we are.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. It shows you how pervasive the problem is out
I
there.
think it just touched
Yeah.
the nerve. That's
No.
what happened.
And what it's bringing up for me is like, can you touch on the difference between acceptance and belonging?
So, all right, do you want to take a biology stem
Yeah.
first? Okay,
Yeah.
so we've got this brain, this 3.2 pounds of tissue that's sitting in our skull. It's the most magical machine that we've ever seen. We don't really even know how our brain works. We've got chemistry, we've got neuroelectricity, we've got soft tissue. We don't really know how this thing works. And it's pretty radical, but it's millions of years old in its first programming. And it's trying to operate in 2023 with modern dilemmas and modern challenges. It's not optimized for that. It's optimized for survival. It's optimized without even having to think, to ready oneself to attack a grizzly bear or run away. A la run towards the saber tooth if that was what was required, or run away.
Yeah.
Wildebeest, grizzly, whatever it might be. We don't even have to think about it. So what ended up taking place is that it's very clear that we're optimized for survival. Our brain is designed to scan the world and find all the things that could be dangerous. But one of the unspoken things that are very, very dangerous to the brain is what a couple 100,000 years ago would have been a death sentence, which was if you and I were doing something with the tribe, so we're tribe members, and we go out and we kind of blow it, or we do something unbecoming, or fill in the narrative. It's not okay in the eyes of the tribe, and we're kicked out. That was a near death sentence because it's too much for two people, maybe a couple kids and a couple cousins, and call it 10 people to hunt, to gather, to forage, to protect against wildebeest, saber-tooths, or warring tribes. It's too much. So it's a near death sentence if you get kicked out of the tribe. So our brains have become highly tuned to the slightest of potential rejection. So it's not so much that we want to belong. It is that, but we're tuned to the slightest potential of rejection. Because when rejection is about to happen, that's a near death sentence. So we say we want to be accepted, and belonging is like part of a human need. You got to squint at that a little bit. Because what's actually happening is we're afraid to be rejected. That's the dictum. Don't get kicked out. Don't blow it. Don't look stupid. Don't be humiliated. Don't be the one that's called out. And that's certainly much more pervasive in much of Western culture. But that's the essence of it. So yes, we want to be accepted because the opposite is the thing that's dangerous.
Yeah.
And when we are accepted, it feels good.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. But we're terrified of being rejected. So what we end up doing is we conform to the norms. We shape shift to belong because belonging is safety.
Yeah.
So fitting in the middle of a pack is safe. As soon as you raise up and speak the truth, you might get your head lopped off. You might get kicked out quickly. You might be ostracized and singled out. And then maybe it's not that immediate circle of people around you that kicks you out, but they're just waiting for the pack leader to come in and be like, oh yeah, that's not cool. You're out of here. Yeah. And in modern times, it's not that demonstrative. It's much more subtle. You just don't get included. You don't get invited.
Yeah.
The party's happening over there. And, FOMO is a fun idea, fear of missing out.
Yeah, right.
And really what's right underneath of FOMO is the fear of how they're going to think if you're not included or if you blow it when you are included. And that's what FOPO is.
Yeah.
Not to get too confusing.
No,
right?
no, this is, yeah.
Yeah, but FOPO, fear of people's opinions, it's one of the mechanisms that's right at the core of survival.